Clara Ivan Lozano Herman was born in Colombia in 1985. She was the daughter of Juan José Lozano and Carmen Herman, a woman of German descent, whose father, being a soldier, fled the country, escaping from the Second World War. The girl, whom almost everyone called Ivan, from a very early age showed her rebellious character, and with age it became more and more noticeable. When she was only 16 years old, she gave birth to her first child, a girl who was named Viviana Carolina, after which she ran away from her parents' house to be with the father of her daughter, a 24-year-old man whose name remains unknown. However, the relationship between them did not work out, and they decided to separate. Later, the girl abandoned her studies and, together with her daughter, moved to a house that belonged to her paternal grandparents. In fact, it was more like a small farm that was located in a village called Tequisa, located in municipality of Chía, just 4 minutes drive north of Bogota. From that moment, Yvonne devoted herself entirely to work because her income was not enough to support herself and her daughter. The girl spent most of her time with her father. In 2005, 19-year-old Yvonne met a 48-year-old man named Orlando Pelayo Rincon, who earned his living by working as a taxi driver. He had 2 children from his first marriage, and at the time of their acquaintance, he was in a second official relationship. In his own words, he was a good father. He had to single-handedly provide for his children when their mother left him. For another, in general, at first glance, Orlando seemed quite an ordinary person who could be trusted. Although at first Yvonne did not consider him as her future partner, this did not bother the man at all, and within a few months he still achieved her. And despite the fact that the age difference was huge, the girl saw in Orlando a man capable to relieve her of all the problems that filled her life. So over time, their relationship became much stronger. Perhaps the only visible problem that could hinder them was the man's insecurity. Orlando was often upset because even people he barely knew made comments to him about the age difference between him and Yvonne. This also caused certain concerns among the girl's relatives. But despite their warnings, even the rebellious Yvonne was determined to continue the relationship with Orlando. However, in March 2007, the girl told the man about her pregnancy, and if in any other case such news could only strengthen the relationship between the partners, then in this particular case it became the reason for a major quarrel. As a result, Orlando said that he was too old to take care of the child and then completely disappeared. Despite this, Yvonne firmly decided that she would give birth. The baby, who was named Luis Santiago Lozano, was born on October 7, 2007, and Yvonne loved him from the very first moment. It is noteworthy that less than 2 months had passed after the birth of Luis Santiago. When Orlando reminded of himself again, he simply called Yvonne and told her that his father had died, and his 6-month-old grandson had died from drug use under very mysterious circumstances. In addition, he said that he wanted to meet his son, and this was the first time he and Yvonne had talked in recent months, despite the offense, and also having learned about all the difficulties that had occurred in the man's life. The girl decided to give him a chance. Maybe she just wanted her son to have a father anyway. After the reconciliation, Orlando practically did not give money to cover the expenses of the child. However, he compensated for this with his attention and came to his son every day to spend time with him. When Yvonne's maternity leave ended, the man helped her by taking their child to her parents so that they could help look after the baby while she worked. In the evenings, he picked him up from there and took him back to the farm. This continued for more than 9 months, and Orlando partly behaved like a model father, but events soon occurred that changed everything. September 24, 2008, Yvonne. As usual after work, she went to her parents to pick up her son. Her mother, Carmen, asked her to stay, but by this time, Orlando had already picked them up, and they were forced to go back to the farm, dropping them off there. The man quickly drove away and did not go inside, saying that he needed to go on business. Later, Yvonne fed her 11-month-old son, and he fell asleep. Around midnight, the girl heard someone open the front door, but this did not alarm her at all, since she thought it was her aunt, who temporarily lived with them and usually returned home much later than her. Only a few minutes later, the girl saw a tall man in a black suit and balaclava who slowly approached her bed, panicking. Yvonne quickly got to her feet and rushed to the crib of her son, who was still sleeping. When the man attacked her, she screamed and tried to run away. But soon the girl realized that the attacker did not come alone. A girl had sneaked into the house with him. She immediately took out a knife and said that she would harm the child if Yvonne continued to scream. In the end, she promised to calm down and asked why they had invaded her house. Obviously, there was no answer, and after a few moments, little Luis Santiago woke up and immediately started crying. In the end, the attacker approached the boy and then picked him up in her arms and carried him to another room. Then Yvonne screamed again, and at that moment the man attacked her with both hands, covered her nose and mouth, not thinking about the consequences. The girl tore the balaclava off the stranger and grabbed his face with her nails. This enraged him, and Yvonne, with horror, imprinted in her mind some of the facial features of the attacker. It was a man with fair skin, a short haircut, carmy eyes, normal lips, and a thin nose. In the end, Yvonne was tied hand and foot. After that, the enraged girl, who had just carried her son to another room, attacked her and started kicking her in the stomach. Since Yvonne was completely immobilized, she simply could not defend herself normally, and what the attackers did later made her think about the true reasons for their attack. At some point, the attackers began throwing things around and asking Yvonne where the money was hidden. The girl immediately asked what kind of money they were talking about. She understood that the only money in the house was the pitiful pennies that were in her pocket. Yvonne, without any hesitation, said that they could take them if they wanted, but according to her words, she had nothing else. After this phrase, they began to beat her again, and at some point, Yvonne simply lost consciousness. When she came to her senses again, no extraneous noise was heard in the house. This silence caused her even more panic. Only with great difficulty was she able to free her arms and legs. Yvonne literally did not know how long she lay unconscious on the floor, but the only thing she immediately understood was that her son was not at home. When Yvonne went outside, she immediately became hysterical, hearing the heart-rending screams of the girl. Versions in no way simplified the search for the child. Perhaps that is why the authorities increased the amount of the reward to 20 million pesos, or $4,500. In fact, the increase of the reward only led to the fact that the Office of the Attorney General began to receive literally hundreds of calls from different parts of the country, and various details that were voiced during these telephone conversations simply had no relation to the case. However, already on September 28, 2008, detectives received a call from a man who reported information that changed the course of the entire investigation, according to the man who already had a conviction for trafficking in illegal substances. Several months ago, he was offered a job related to the kidnapping of a child, but he refused. Nevertheless, he remembered that the person who turned to him for help then was a taxi driver from the municipality of Chia. Then one of the investigators remembered the testimony of a witness who claimed to have seen a taxi car near Yvonne's house at about the same time as the kidnapping occurred, and despite the fact that the man who provided this information preferred to remain in the shadows. But the authorities nevertheless located him and found out that his name was Julian Andres Hernandez. As a result of a short interrogation, he pointed to Orlando Pelayo Rincon as the person who had contacted him in the past and asked him for a favor. In addition, he specified that he not only asked to kidnap the boy, but also to kill him. Allegedly, this was the main reason why he refused to take on this job. In no doubt, Julian's testimony stunned the police officers, since none of them could believe that Orlando was capable of not only organizing the kidnapping of his own son, but also giving the order for his murder. However, in fact, he was immediately delivered to the police station for preliminary interrogation. And if at first the man seemed depressed and completely denied his involvement in this crime, then later he nevertheless admitted his guilt and asked to provide him with a lawyer. During the official admission of guilt, Orlando said that he hired people from the municipality of Villavicencio and paid them only 500,000 pesos, about $110, to kidnap the baby and leave him to the mercy of fate in some village. According to the man's testimony, he was pushed to this terrible act by Yvonne, who constantly demanded money from him for the child. In addition, Orlando named the people with whom he contacted to carry out this monstrous plan. One of the participants in the crime was a girl named Marta Lucia Garzón Munoz. In the past, she had already served a sentence of 2 years and 8 months in prison for trafficking in illegal substances. Another participant in the crime was a man named Jorge Orlando Avay, who allegedly was Marta's common-law partner. On the morning of September 29th of the same year, Information leaked to the press that the boy's father was in custody and accused of organizing the kidnapping of his own son. At first, few could believe it. As for Yvonne, she was simply beside herself with so much horrific information that fell on her that day, as a result of which she even fell into a deep depressive crisis and was forced to go to the hospital. Doctors and investigators did their best to cheer her up and persuaded her not to lose hope that everything was okay with little Luis Santiago. But her personal tragedy had just begun, since at that time the press had only presented arguments about Orlando's alleged involvement in the crime. However, by the evening of the same day, the authorities confirmed that they really considered the man the alleged organizer of the child's kidnapping. So he was formally charged and the judge remanded him in custody until the investigation was completed. Later, investigators once again talked to Orlando, and they managed to force him to contact Marta and ask her to return the kidnapped child. Thus, they were able to track the location of the girl and arrest her in the company of another suspected criminal. Despite the fact that the search for all persons involved in the kidnapping was swift and successful, the criminals still did not agree to provide any details about the location where the child could be. As a result, the investigation of this case continued. As the information spread, some citizens began to say that Luis Santiago had already died a long time ago. Others believed that he could have been hidden in some house, but the authorities were never able to confirm any of these versions. After some time, Jorge, Marta's accomplice, agreed to talk to representatives of the media. According to him, he initially did not want to take on this job, but the girl was able to convince him. In addition, Jorge mentioned that they met with Orlando at least 3 times to agree on all the details of the future kidnapping. On the appointed day, it was the boy's father who drove them to Yvonne's house, and after everything happened, they allegedly gave the child to the father and never heard anything more about him. Without a doubt, absolutely all citizens who followed the development of this case were surprised by Orlando's behavior. It is obvious that he knew about the fate of his son from the very beginning, and despite this, he prolonged Yvonne's suffering and pretended that he cared. Later, the police interrogated the man several more times in the hope of getting at least some information from him about the whereabouts of his son. In fact, they subjected him to several tests at once, even checked him with a lie detector, and only a few hours after that, he finally told that he left his son on a hill located about 3 kilometers from the municipality of Chia, and since he did not specify whether his son was alive at that time or not, the authorities still retained hope that they will be able to find the boy alive. Thus, early in the morning of September 30th, a large-scale search operation was launched in the specified location, in which more than 150 police officers took part. The child's body was found about 3 hours after the start of the operation. As a result, the authorities immediately cordoned off the area and began to extract the remains. The first to report the monstrous discovery was the governor of the Cundinamarca department, Andres Gonzalez, who assured the press that he had not very good news. According to preliminary data, the boy died of hypothermia or asphyxia, but it was not yet possible to identify him. Later, Yvonne, accompanied by her relatives, went to identify the body, and as soon as the girl realized that it was indeed her son, she immediately lost consciousness and collapsed on the floor. As a result, she was again taken to the medical center. The next morning, General Luis Perez, who was in charge of the Task Force for the Defense of Human Freedom, which was investigating the case, reported that little Luis Santiago had been kidnapped by his own father and his accomplices. According to him, by this time the child's body had already been delivered to the forensic center in Bagat for a complete identification and determination of the cause of death. He explained that although the family had already identified the baby, they had not yet received scientific and technical confirmation using a DNA test. However, almost everyone understood that this was only a simple formality. Meanwhile, Yvonne, while in the clinic, wanted only one thing: to die as soon as possible so that she could finally be reunited with her son. Only she did not know yet that she would soon become a mother again. Having heard this news from the doctor, the girl ran out of the room and rushed into the fresh air. She did not understand how it could happen that practically on the same day, when she lost one child, she found out that she would become the mother of another, and the father of this baby was apparently none other than Orlando. A few hours later, the girl's mother came to the medical center to comfort her and insisted that they go to pray in the hospital chapel. But for Yvonne herself, there was no such force that would make her do this. She looked at the crucifix with hatred, and the only thing she wanted to ask God was to let her die. In addition to her mother on that day, Yvonne was also visited by the President of Colombia, Álvaro Uribe Vélez, and his wife, Lina Moreno. They asked her not to abandon the child who, in their opinion, was not to blame for what happened. That same evening in the municipality of Chía, there was a protest in which about 300 people took part. The grandfather of the deceased boy, Juan Jose, who until the last hoped to see him alive and unharmed, was one of the participants in this action. However, he simply did not have words to express the pain he felt upon learning of the fate that befell his grandson. The elderly man only stated that he felt sorry for those people who committed this unthinkable crime. According to him, he left their fate in the hands of God in order to demonstrate the condemnation of the general public towards the people who committed this monstrous crime. Bogotá Council member Gilma Jimenez suggested that all Colombians take part in a minute of silence. In turn, Bogotá Mayor Samuel Moreno supported this idea. Private television channels also devoted their airtime to this event. At the subsequent press conference, the prosecutor announced that he plans to seek the maximum punishment of 60 years in prison for all three criminals. At the same time, he noted that it was Orlando, the boy's father, who deserved more condemnation, since he not only planned his kidnapping, but also personally took his life. The director of the Bogotá Forensic Center, Pedro Franco, reported that, according to the results of the studies, at the time the body was discovered, the child had already been dead at least 36 hours, and the main cause of death was mechanical asphyxia. Early in the morning, the boy's body was brought to the chapel of the medical center, where Yvonne was still, without a doubt, the most terrible test for the girl was to see her son in a coffin at the farewell to Luis Santiago. Not only his close relatives were present, but also ordinary local residents, as well as various political figures. During the burial of the body, Yvonne lost consciousness again and was taken to the already familiar hospital. She was still experiencing physical pain and strong emotional shock from everything that had happened in her life. By this time, she had already decided that she would give birth to a child, but she was going to do this only to leave him with her sister. Every night, the girl woke up from the thought that the same thing could happen to her future baby as with his older brother. And despite the fact that nothing could be changed, all the pain that Orlando caused Yvonne was simply impossible to measure, and he still had to appear in court. The first stage of the trial began on November 26, 2008, and the three defendants arrived one after another at the courthouse. As for Orlando, he was brought in around 11 a.m. At first, the man did not show any signs of fear in connection with what was happening. Moreover, it was noticeable that he was in an elated mood and even smiled while talking to his lawyer. There were relatively few people present in the courtroom, no more than 50 people in total. Among them, one could single out a young man named Jose Carrillo, Marta's ex-husband. Despite the cruelty of the crime that the girl committed, Jose did everything possible so that their common daughter could visit her. According to her, Marta was a loving mother, and he did not understand why she did this to little Luis Santiago. Yvonne was also present in the courtroom. She listened attentively to the testimony of the defendants and sincerely did not understand why they talked about the crime they had committed as if it were some kind of heroic act. After several sessions, Orlando again agreed with all the accusations against him and eventually admitted that he had planned this kidnapping because the boy was interfering with their relationship with Yvonne and his wife. The man said that his wife knew about the existence of the child, but she was not sure that Luis Santiago was his son. On December 30th, 2008, after hearing the testimony of both sides, Judge Juanita Gomez found all three defendants guilty of committing the crime. Jorge Orlando Aval and Marta Lucia Garzón Muñoz, accused of aggravated murder and kidnapping, agreed only to the kidnapping charge. As a result, they were sentenced to 27 years in prison. Intern Orlando Pelayo was sentenced to 58 years and 9 months in prison. As the direct organizer of this crime, the man who took the life of his own son, she spent the next few weeks in a medical center where doctors monitored her condition and her future child. It is obvious that this pregnancy was unusually difficult, although the girl assured herself that she would never be happy again. In 2009, a ray of hope nevertheless appeared in her life, namely her baby, whom she named Miguel Angel. It was a real miracle that the child survived despite all the troubles that happened in Yvonne's life. The already familiar to us governor of the Department of Cundinamarca, Andres Gonzalez, who knew about the girl's situation, initiated a special solidarity campaign to provide the child and his mother with all the conditions for a normal life. His call was heard by several local businessmen, at once who helped with the purchase of the most necessary things and food for the baby. However, most of all, this family needed their own house or apartment in connection with this. The Solidarity Fund of Cundinamarca created an account to collect funds that in the future were directed to these purposes. Miguel Angel was one of the reasons why Yvonne clung to her life and continued to fight. She spent her days and nights caring for a little boy who was the spitting image of her older brother. She had to find the strength to give her child everything she could give him, and when her life began to return to normal, Orlando reminded himself again. In 2009, the man's lawyer filed an appeal and demanded that the court's decision be declared invalid, claiming that procedural law had been violated against his client and that his confession had allegedly been made under duress. In addition, Orlando's human rights defender claimed that by the end of the trial, it had not been proven that his client was in fact the biological father of Luis Santiago. In other words, the lawyer insisted that the court simply did not have any evidence to support an additional charge. However, the court still did not accept this appeal and stated that Orlando's human rights defender's argument was not capable of challenging the previously announced decision. Thus, in 2010, the Supreme Court confirmed the sentence for Orlando, sentencing him to 58 years, 9 months, and 16 days in prison. As for the accomplices of the man, they received new, more severe sentences equal to 45 years in prison, about 2 years after the death of Luis Santiago. Yvonne decided to leave everything behind and move to Bogotá with her son Miguel Angel. After moving, she got a job in one of the supermarkets and resumed her studies in high school. And although at first her neighbor helped her look after her little son, she still preferred to give him to the care of her aunt. Since then, her main goal was to finish high school and get a profession in criminology. After that, she was going to become part of the team of the foundation called Everything Can Change. In essence, Yvonne wanted to advocate for life imprisonment for people who committed a crime against minors. Another of her dreams was to strengthen the existing program aimed at providing psychological assistance to children who had become victims of any physical aggression. It is noteworthy that while Yvonne was trying to get her life back on track, Orlando was seeking to improve the conditions of detention in prison, as well as to reduce the overall term of imprisonment. A whole series of his petitions began in August 2012, when he first asked to be transferred to another prison, citing threats to his safety and inhumane treatment by the guards of the correctional institution, but his request was never granted. In April 2015, persuaded by fellow prisoners who spent all their free time reading criminal codes, Orlando claimed that the Supreme Court had disregarded his right to a reduction in his sentence because he had fully admitted his guilt. Using his right to petition, the man formally demanded a reduction in his sentence, citing the principle of mitigation of punishment for a full admission of guilt. But the court responded that in his case, such benefits were not provided for since he had committed a serious crime against a minor. In May 2017, Orlando filed another petition in which he asked to change his preventive measure to house arrest, claiming that he had been suffering from serious illnesses for a long time. A month later, the man again reminded of himself and insisted on his request. As a result, the judge ordered a health check for Orlando, but doctors did not find any illnesses that could prevent him from continuing to serve his sentence within the walls of the correctional institution. He was notified of this in early October 2017. Over the next 2 years, the man continued to regularly report serious health problems, but despite this, representatives of the Forensic Medical Commission found no grounds for changing the preventive measure. At the end of October 2020, Orlando was once again denied an alternative measure of restraint in the form of house arrest. The man filed a new petition only in August 2022 when he told the judge that he had been the victim of an attack by other prisoners that same year. Yvonne caused a small commotion on social networks by publishing a touching video on her TikTok account, dedicated to her late son, Luis Santiago. Although about 14 years had passed since the boy's death, Yvonne was still overcome by painful memories associated with this event. The next time Luis Santiago's case surfaced in the memory of Colombians was on April 21st, 2023. On this day, it became known about the death of Orlando Pelayo, who had recently been held in the maximum security department of a hospital located in the municipality of Valledupar. According to the head doctor, Daniel Gutierrez Mann had various health problems and suffered from kidney failure as well as diabetes. A few days after this, Yvonne once again talked to the media and said that she had mixed feelings regarding the death of Orlando. The case of Luis Santiago, without exaggeration, became an event that shook the whole of Colombia. Perhaps it is still remembered with pain in the heart, and we are talking not only about the mother of a little boy whose life was taken by his own father, but also about hundreds or even thousands of other citizens